Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to learn how to create a desktop application. Yes, right. We are going to create a desktop application instead of creating an Android application, but we're going to use Compose for doing so. That means we are going to use Kotlin itself for creating the entire UI of our desktop application. So let's first of all see what would be the end result of our application. So as you can see on your screen, this is the desktop application that we are going to create, where we are able to fetch some data from an API, and this data is regarding to the news. So I'm fetching the top headlines from India, and this is the result for it. We can scroll through it, and apart from that, we can also search for a specific news. For example, let's say anything related to football, and it will load the data accordingly. We can even click on a particular news and it will redirect to the website where we can see the detail about that particular news. So this will be the scope of our project, where we are going to use Ktor as well as Compose for desktop to create this entire project. Let's jump straight into it. So before we jump into coding, let me give you a quick overview of Compose multi-platform. So this is a fairly modern concept where we are going to use the Compose UI for building applications, not just for Android, but for iOS as well as desktop applications. So as you can see from this particular page, that is Compose multi-platform. This is the official page by JetBrains. And here it shows the different platforms that we can use Compose for creating the applications. So we can create Android, as we all know, by using Jetpack Compose, but we can also create for desktop, iOS and web. So iOS and web are still in experimental and alpha stage. I would say Android is more stable right now. Desktop is also there, but I wouldn't say it is that stable. Yeah, it has its own limitations as of now, but we can still create a fairly simple desktop application using Compose. And I believe that moving forward, there will be a lot of updates regarding all these platforms, all these supported platforms, and we will be able to create the applications for all these different platforms using just one single language, that is Kotlin. Now let's start with the actual coding part. So we are going to create the entire application step by step, code by code. I'm not going to give you a walkthrough, but we will code along to create the entire project. Okay. The first thing that we need to create a desktop application using Compose is IntelliJ. So I'm using the community edition for it. You can simply download it from their official website, and once you have installed it, this is the first screen that you will see when you open it for the very first time. So we are going to create a new project, and I'm going to call it your news. You can name it anything you want, and you can change the location accordingly. It's totally up to you. And once we have added all the information, we can simply click on create, and it will create the project for us. So by default, IntelliJ provides us with a very basic desktop application where we can simply click on a button. Once the Gradle is synced and everything is ready, we can run the project to see the default application that is provided to us. For running the application, we can simply click on this drop down and click on the play button over here, and it will run the application. So this is the default application that is provided to us, where we can simply click on the button to change the text. Now we are going to update this particular project in order to add the Ktor as well as the API and the UI for our project. Let's see step by step how we can do that. So the very first thing that we need for our project are the dependencies. And for adding that, we have to open up build.gradle.kts and paste our dependencies inside this dependencies block like this. So these are the dependencies that is required for our project. So the first three are related to Ktor. We are using the CIO engine. We require content negotiation. We require serialization for Kotlin X JSON, as well as we require JSON. Once we have added that, we require to add plugins too. So the only plugin that is required is for serialization. And after we have added these two things, after we have added the dependency as well as plugin, we can simply load the Gradle changes to see if there are any errors or not. So yeah, so everything has been added successfully, and we will move to the next step now. So for the next step, we are going to structure our project first. For doing that, we can add a couple of more packages. So right now we have just Kotlin and the main.kd file, but we can add like 3 more packages, mainly for data, UI, and utils. So let us first add those. We will add a data package. We will add a UI package and a utils package, and inside the data we can have a model package, and inside the UI we can have a screens package. We can structure it in a number of ways. It's totally up to you how you can or how you want to structure this. I'm trying to keep it as clean as possible. Now let us see the API that we are going to use for our project. So for our project, we are going to use the news API, and to get the API key, we simply have to log in. Once you have logged in, it will provide you with the API key. Just save it and keep it with you. And after that, let us go to the documentation to see the API endpoints that we are going to use for our project. So in our case, we are going to use 2 endpoints. So the very first endpoint is everything, where we are going to search for a particular query word. For example, if we search for Bitcoin, it will give us back all the articles that is related to Bitcoin. So apart from this Q parameter, there is all these parameters as well, but for the sake of project, we are just going to use the Q parameter. So the next endpoint is the top headlines. So as you can see that this endpoint provides live, top and breaking headlines for a country, specific category in a country, single source or multiple sources, like a lot of other things are there. But for the sake of this project, we are just simply going to retrieve the top headlines for a given country. And for doing so, we will provide with the respective country code. So in my case, I'm going to provide the country code for India, that is IN, and these are the valid country codes. So once you have received the API key, and once you have gone through the documentation, let us go back to the Android Studio to actually use that API key and to call these endpoints to fetch the respective data. So once we have the API key with us, we have to save it in our project so that we can use it whenever we want. Now there are multiple ways to save it securely, but for the sake of the project, for this particular project, we are going to save it inside a file. So we are going to create simply a file called constants inside the utils package and define a static block called constants, and we will simply say API key and add our API key here. So API goes here. So I'll add mine, you can add yours, and then we can simply refer to this API key wherever we want to use our API key in the rest of our project. So once we have saved the API key in the project, the next thing we want to do is to create the model classes for the API response. Now we can do that manually, or we can use a plugin to automatically create the data classes from the JSON response. So for adding that plugin, we will go to settings, and inside the plugins section, we will just search for JSON to Kotlin class and install this plugin. So I already installed it, but once you install it and restart the IDE, the next thing we want to do here is we want to get the JSON response. We will have to copy the JSON response and paste it inside the plugin, and this plugin will automatically create the respective data classes. Okay, so let's do that. So for doing that, we will open up a browser and let's say we are choosing the top headlines endpoint. You can either choose the everything API endpoint or top headlines. Both are having the same format for the response. So in my case, I am choosing this and we have to provide the API key. So once you've added your API key and call the API, you will get something like this as a response. So what we have to do here is we have to simply copy the entire thing and go back to the ID, and over here we are going to add those data classes. So for doing that, we'll simply do a right click, new, and choose this option. So this is something that will appear once you have installed the plugin correctly. After that, just simply paste it, format it. So if it formats correctly, it means that the JSON is valid. Next thing you will have to do is we will go to advanced, and over here we will choose it to auto determine nullable or not from JSON value. Okay, so what will happen here is that it will automatically determine whether the field is nullable or not, and accordingly it will create those fields. Then we will go to annotation and we'll choose JSON for serialization. There are other ways also, but for this project we are doing JSON. Now we can provide a base data class. So what will happen here is it will create the respective data classes, but we can provide the name of the base data class. Okay, so in this case I'm providing it as news, and we can just simply call generate. Now what will happen here is it will automatically create the required data classes. So news is created, article is created, source is created. Okay, now there might be a case that some of the fields that is mentioned as not nullable are still nullable, because remember that the fields that are marked as nullable is marked because of the value that we have provided in the JSON. So let's say there is some new data where a certain, let's say there is a new data where the name field is not having any value. In that case, the app will throw an error saying that this is null, but we haven't provided it as nullable. So we have to make sure that those things are correct and accordingly made nullable. Okay. Now after this, we have to serialize these classes also. You can just simply write serializable. Go to article, make this also as serializable. Go to source, make it also as serializable. Now we have added the data classes that is required for the API response. The next thing we have to do is to create the Ktor client and the functions for calling both the endpoints. Okay, let's do that. Now for creating the Ktor client, we are going to create another file, this time under data and not model. So we are going to create a file and we are going to call it as news API client. Okay, let's make it inside data. Okay, so as you can see, now data has a submodule called model and a different file called news API client. Now there are different ways to actually do this, so actually structure the entire project as I said earlier, but for the sake of this particular project, what we are going to do here is we are going to add the functions for calling the endpoints as well as the Ktor client inside the same file. We are going to create a block, a static block calling news API client. We're going to create a private variable called client, and then we are going to define or create the Ktor client. So for doing that, we have to write HTTP client, choose this option, and the engine that we are providing here is CIO. Now we are going to install content negotiation. You can write it correctly, yeah, and inside this we will provide JSON. So here we have basically added the CIO engine. We have added the content negotiation plugin, which will help us to serialize and deserialize the JSON data. Now inside this, we are going to define both the functions that will call the respective endpoints. So The first one is called get top headlines, and we are going to return news. Okay. Now inside this, we are going to define the URL. So let me simply copy it and we have to add the API. So we are going to say constants.api key. Okay. Let me write it first and I will explain it what is happening here. And after defining the API endpoint, which is basically this URL, which basically means that we are calling the top headlines endpoint for country India with the provided API key that we have stored in the constants file. Now to actually fetch the data, we have to use the client that we have created called get, provide the URL, and then call for the body. Now what will happen here is this is the API endpoint that we are calling or that we are fetching using the Ktor client that we have created, and then we are requesting for the body of the response. Similarly, we are going to create another function called get search news, which will require the search text, and this will also return news. Now for this also we need to provide the URL. So let me copy and paste it. And then we are going to again call the client, provide the URL, and request for the body. So we have added both the functions for calling both the endpoints. The first one is for calling the top headlines for the country India for the given API key with the given API key. The second is for calling the searched item, and in this case we are requiring a search text as a parameter for the function. Then we are calling the everything API endpoint with the query as the search text and providing the API key. And in both the cases we are calling or we are using the Ktor client that we have just created. We are calling the API key and requesting for the body as of the response. Next, we are going to finally use all these things and create the UI and call these functions inside it to fetch the values and display the data. Now for creating the UI, we are going to add 3 files under the UI package. Actually, we don't require the screens sub package because there is only one screen with multiple composables. So we're going to rename this. We're just simply going to call it as UI. Okay. Now inside the UI package, we are going to add 3 files that will be representing 3 different composables. So these 3 files will be main screen, side panel, and main content. So side panel is the left section that we saw in the demo where we are displaying the logo, the search text bar, and the headlines button. And the right section is the main content where we are displaying the news articles. So we will create 3 different files for all this. So the first file, let us call it as main screen, second as side panel, and third as main content. Okay. Now inside the main screen, let us create the respective composable, which is main screen. And inside this, we are going to add a couple of mutable states. So we are going to add these mutable states. So the first is for the articles. So we just require the list of articles. So if you see the model, we have this news, right, as the base class, but we don't require the status and total results. For now, we just require the list of articles. We can even use status if you want, but for the sake of simplicity, we are just using articles. And that is why we're just going to require this list of articles. And for storing the mutable state of that, we have added this particular variable. Then for the header title, so on the right section we have a header also, which either displays headlines or whatever we have searched for, and another mutable state for the search text. Now after that, we're also going to add something called scope, which will be a remember coroutine scope. Basically what this will do is this will help us to provide the coroutine scope at the position where the composable is called, and it will automatically be removed when the composable is not in the picture. Okay. Now after that, we are going to call launched effect because we want to call the API as soon as the composable is getting called. So this launch effect is triggered depending upon the key that we provide. So in this case, we are providing the search text as the key. What we want to do here is that we want this block to be triggered only when the search text is changed. So for the very first time, when the main screen is called and is displayed on the screen, this entire block will be called. But to recompose or to recall this block, we have to change the value of search text. So by default, this is empty. Okay, so this will be empty. Now we want to call the API inside this block. We want to first of all fetch the top headlines. So we are going to use the scope that we have defined. We're going to call launch to get the coroutine scope, and inside this we are going to call try and catch block, and for the catch block we are just going to say error fetching data, with the error being the message. And inside the try block we are going to write the logic search that we are either calling the searched query, that is the everything endpoint API, or the top headlines query. Okay, so let us simply say news data equals to if search text is not empty. That means that we have entered certain value inside it and we have changed the value of this because by default it is empty. So as soon as it's not empty, we are going to call news API client dot get search news, or else we are going to call the top headlines. Okay. Now what this will do here is, for the first time, since this is empty, this will be false and this will be called, and we will receive the top headlines. Okay, so now the top headlines is basically the news, right? But we want the article, the list of articles. So we are going to say articles equals to news data dot articles. Now this will update the articles mutable state. Okay. Now for the UI section, we're going to use row. Okay, and we are going to call the side panel and the main content. Right, let us create those composable as well. So let us open the side panel, create composable, call it as side panel, and let us create the main content composable also, call it as main content. Now let us first create the side panel. Okay, now the side panel, if you recall, it has majorly two operations. One is to check if a certain button, that is headlines in our scenario, is clicked or not, or the second operation that is performed over there is to add the search text. For both the scenarios, we are going to add a callback lambda function. Okay, so we are just going to say on menu selected, because you can add a lot of things. For the sake of this project, I have just added it as just headlines, but for example, let's say you want to add more options over there, you can do so, right? And this on menu selected will work for all those scenarios. And what you want to pass is the header also, right? So for example, if I'm clicking on headlines, I want to change the title in the main content, right? So this side panel will return as the header that we want to display in the main content. You can use string over here. You can use either an enum class if you have more than one menu, but for this project, as I said, I am just using headlines. Now after that, we will also have another lambda function which will basically return us the search text. Okay. And then inside this, we are also going to require a mutable state for the search text. Right? Let us import the getter and setup for this. Yeah. Now after this, we want to create the left section, right? The UI of the left section. So that is basically a column with three parts. The top part being the logo, then the search text field, and then the headlines button. Okay. So we are going to add a column. We are going to add a modifier called fill max width, and we are going to keep it as 15. Let me import it. Let me choose the correct one. Yep. 15 and fill max height. So what this 0.15 basically means is that we are taking the 15% of the available width of the screen. So as you can see that the fraction of the maximum width to use is between either 0 and 1. Okay, where 1 being the 100% of the width available, and accordingly we are adjusting the width because we require a narrow side panel and a broader main content, right? And we are taking all the available height that is required. We are also adding a padding of 12 dp. Let me import that too. And after that, we are adding some horizontal alignment, making it centrally aligned horizontally. And then inside this, we are basically going to get the bitmap of the image, right? Now to get the image or to load the image, there are a few things that we want to do. First of all, we have to add the resource file. Okay, so in my case, I'm using just a PNG, a small logo sort of thing that I created. You can use any image you want. Okay, just copy the image and paste it inside the resources. Okay, so I have pasted this image under resources. Now to read this particular image, what we're going to do here is, first of all, let me write it like this. We're going to say use resource, and we will write the name of the file. So after this, we are going to use this input stream and convert it to a bitmap, and then use that bitmap to display the image. Okay. We can't just directly write the path name and display it as it happens in the web development scenario. We have to convert it to a certain format and then use it. In this scenario, we are converting it to a bitmap. So for doing that, we will write load image bitmap and provide the stream. Now this will return as a bitmap. Okay. Now what we can do is we can just simply use image composable that we have. As you can see, like these are the options for the image, bitmap, image vector, and painter. So we are going to use the bitmap one, and we are going to say bitmap and provide the content description as logo and a modifier. So for the modifier, I'm just keeping the width as 100 dp. After that, we are going to add some space. For that, I am adding the modifier as padding 18 dp. So up to this point, we have used an image, converted to a bitmap, and displayed the image, right? Let us update or let us call the side panel here also. Let's say on menu selected and on search news. And let us also change this from app to main screen. We can remove this, that is not required. We can clear this, not required. And let us try to run this app and check if everything is working fine or not. Now what this should do is this should just simply display the image, right? Now nothing else. Okay, we just want to check if there is any error or not. If there is any error, we will rectify it. Okay, so as I said, it will just simply display the image, right? You can see, considering that the left panel or the side panel is very narrow, this image is perfect, right? Let us move on. Okay, let us move on with the side panel. Now after adding the space, we are going to add the search button or the text field, not the button but the text field. Okay. Now inside this, we're going to add the modifier and we're going to fill the max width and give it a height of 50 dp. Make it as single line. Add the placeholder, add the text, call it as search, and then the value, that is the search text on value change. Basically return us the typed value and will update the search text mutable state with the typed value. Now after the on value change, we are going to add the trailing icon, but before that I suppose we can make some modifications. So over here, apart from the search text, we can also pass header, right? Because in both these scenarios we require different headers. For the first one, we require the header that will be the menu selected. It can be headlines or it can be anything that you are creating as different menu options, and in case of one search text, it should be a different header, right? Considering that, we will add the trailing icon, which will basically be an icon button. So we are going to call it as icon button and we will call on click. Okay, and once we're calling on click, we are going to call on new searched, which will basically take the search text as well as the header. So this will be results for whatever we have searched. And then going to add a modifier to make the size as 40 dp, and we will also add a pointer hover icon. So basically by default, when we hover on let's say a clickable component, it won't be changing the icon to a pointer icon, right? By default it will show just the default icon, but in case of websites and desktop application, we want to make sure that the user knows that the specific component is clickable, so we have to change the default icon to a pointer icon. Okay, so just call the function as pointer icon, but we need to provide something over here. Now that something is basically the type of icon that we want. So what we can do here is we can just simply use or create a utility function that provides us with that. And for creating that, we will first of all create a utility file. Okay, and inside that file we are going to create a function called, let's say, hand cursor, or we can just simply say hand cursor, and we will say pointer icon cursor dot get predefined cursor dot hand cursor. and over here we're just simply going to call hand cursor, right? Now this will provide us with the hand cursor that is required for the pointer hover icon. Basically it requires an icon and we're just simply providing the icon by calling this function. I've created this function because we're going to need that specific line at multiple places. Okay, instead of writing it again and again, we can just simply call this function. And after that, what we have to do is we have to provide the icon for the icon button. We're going to say image vector at the composer, and we are providing the search. We're going to say default search, content description as search button, and print as color black. Okay. Now this creates the search text field. Let us again run the application and check. Okay, so we have an error over here because we have to accommodate both the parameters that we have modified. The first one is the search text and the header. Okay, so this we have to make this change and then again call the or run the application. So we have, as you can see, both the things, and you can see on hovering on the search icon, it is changing to the pointer icon, right? Let's continue with the side panel. The last thing that is required for the side panel is the text button for the headlines option. So as I said, I'm just adding one text button because I'm just showing the top headlines, but in case you are using other query parameters, you can add a lot of other options, menu items, menu options as well. Okay. So let me just add simply a text button on click, and on the click of this, what we're going to do is we are going to update the search text to empty, and on menu selected to return the header as headlines. Okay. And then inside the text button we have to provide a text, and we are going to call it, we're going to provide the text as headlines, font weight as font weight bold, color as color dot black, modifier as modifier dot, again as I said, we are going to use that hand cursor at multiple places. We also want to do over here also because we want to change the pointer, the cursor, to the hand or the pointer cursor. So we're simply going to say hand cursor. So what we are doing here is, as soon as we hover on the top of the text button, it should change the cursor to the hand cursor, and when we click on the button, it will update the search text to an empty string, and it will provide the headline as the on menu selected. Okay. Let us again run the application and check if the text button is visible. So yes, as you can see, as we are hovering on top of the headlines option, it is changing to the hand cursor. Okay. So let us go back to the main screen. I think we should change this to underscore search text and underscore header title, because we want to keep it as same as search text and header title. Okay, just to avoid any confusion. And what we are going to do here is we are going to simply say, for the on new search part, I'm going to say search text is equals to underscore search text, and the header title equals to underscore header title. And for the on menu selected, we are going to say header title equals to it, the search text to empty, and articles as empty list of. Similarly here also. Now why we are converting search text to empty here is because if you remember that we want to rerun this particular block again and again, right? And when this will rerun is when the value of this key is changed. So what is happening here is, let's say if I select the headlines, if I've searched something, for example, if I've searched something, I've received this search text and I've updated the search text. Now since I've updated this, the value of this key changes and this entire thing will rerun and call the respective function. Again, let's say if I click on the headlines option and I receive the title and everything, upon clicking it, it will again update the search text value to empty. So this will again update and it will again call the block, right? And we are updating the articles to empty list because we want to handle a loading state. So we want to show a text as loading when the articles are empty, and as soon as we have received some articles, we are going to update that particular UI to show the actual data, that is the cards with the news. So after the side panel, we have to work on the main content. Just simply call main content over here, and main content would require two parameters. The first being the header title and the second will be articles list. Right. Now what we have to do here is that if we have articles, then we will show the list, otherwise we will simply show a text as loading. Okay. So we'll say if articles dot is not empty, then we'll show the actual news, otherwise we are going to show simply a text, but this text would be at the very center. So we are going to use a column and we are going to use a modifier which will take the max size. Let me import this correctly, and a background of color white. The vertical arrangement would be center. The horizontal alignment would be centered horizontally, and this will be just a simple text which says loading. Now for the actual list of articles, we have to do a couple of things. So first of all, it will be a column, right? And it will have a modifier as fill max size, background as color white, and padding as 8 dp. We import this. Yep. And then what we have to do is we have to display the header, right? So we are going to display the header title at the very top and then the list of items. So we are going to say text. For the actual text, it will be header title. For the font size, it will be 24 sp. We import this as well. For the font weight, it would be font weight dot bold. Let us make as extra bold. Then we will give some space and then the list. So for this space, we are going to say modifier dot padding, and we are going to give a space of 4 dp. Then we are going to add a lazy vertical grid. So we are making it as a grid layout sort of thing. So we are going to use a lazy vertical grid. So for the columns, we are going to say grid cells dot adaptive, because what we want is we want the number of columns to be adaptive to the size of the screen. So let's say if the size is small, there can be only just one column, and as soon as we keep on increasing the size of the screen, the number of columns should also increase. Okay, and we also have to provide the minimum size. Okay, so minimum size will be, let's say, 300 dp. Now after that, we're going to arrange it basically we have to give some space between each of these items. So we're going to give a space of, let's say, 4 dp. And for the actual items, which is basically this one, we're going to pass the articles from the parameter, and then we're going to create the card for the individual news article item. So we're going to say card, then we have to add some modifiers to it. So we're going to say modifier width as 400 dp, okay, height as 200 dp, padding as 4 dp, and then we are going to provide the hover icon also for this, simply calling that particular function, which provides us with the hand cursor, and we're going to make it as clickable. Okay, and what should happen here is when we click, it should open up the respective news article website. So basically, if the news is from, let's say, Times of India, or let's say if it is from BBC or some particular website, upon clicking the card, it will open up that particular link on the browser for that particular news. So we are going to say that if the URL is not null, only then perform this particular action, right? Okay, now inside this particular block, what we are going to do is we are going to call a function which opens up the URL, and that particular function will be defined under utility file. Okay, so let us do that. So we'll call it as open URL. We will provide the URI as a parameter. We will say, let's say, desktop equals to desktop dot get desktop, and we will call desktop dot browse and provide the URI. Okay, so there are actually a number of ways to do this for a desktop based application. So if we did do a quick Google search, you will see there are a number of ways to actually browse the URL. So there are ways to actually do specifically for a specific OS, but just to keep it simple, we are just simply calling this particular function. Okay, now going back to the main content, we are just simply going to call open URL, wrap the URL in URI, and import it. Okay, now before moving forward, there is a slight change that we can do over here. We can, instead of doing that, we can just do null or empty and make it and negate it. Basically, if it is not null or empty, then we will open the URL. Now after that, what we will do here is we will use a box composable. We are using box composable because we want to overlap a couple of composable on top of another. Basically, there will be a background image on top of which we are going to display the title and the content. Now inside the box, we are going to have a bitmap. Now this bitmap is basically for showing a default image in case there is no thumbnail image available. So we are again going to use resource, and I have already added an image called noimage.png. So I'm just simply going to call that and a lambda callback, which basically returns the input stream, and I would say load image bitmap, and I will pass this stream. Now we will check if the URL is null or empty. In case it is null or empty, we are going to display the bitmap that we have defined above. So we are going to say bitmap, and for the content description we are going to say no image available, and after that we are having a modifier which will basically make the size of this to be 100 dp and align it to top center, and finally we will use content scale to crop this. Now in case there is the URL to image available, we're going to display that image itself. So for doing that, we will say image, but now we require the actual image, right? So we can't just simply use the URL, right? We can't just use that string. We have to fetch that data. We have to use that data. So we have to use that data to convert to an actual image. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create another function called load picture, which will basically, what this will do is it will take in the URL that we are providing and it convert the URL to an actual object. So we are converting the string URL to an actual object and we are reading the bytes of it, and then we are converting it to a image bitmap. Now this will basically convert the string to a URL object, then we will read the bytes of it and then finally convert it to a image bitmap. Now finally what we can do here is we can just simply call not this but load picture and pass the it.url to image. For the content description, we are going to say news thumbnail, and for the content scale again we are going to just crop it. Okay. Now this will take care of the image. Okay. Now before running the application to check it once, what we have to do is in the main screen we have to make sure that we have updated this to pass the header, title and articles, and then we can simply run the application to check if we are able to display the list of images for now, list of article images. So you can see we are getting the loading state in case the articles is not available, and as soon as it's available we are getting the thumbnails, right? Now the last thing that we need to do in the main content is to display the title and the content inside it. For doing that we will use a column. We require a modifier for this. We are going to say modifier dot align. We will align it to bottom start because we want to place the title and content at the bottom. We are going to say background to color white, and we are going to set the padding to 4 dp. Now the first text that we want is the title, if there is, and what we have to do here is we have to change the color to black because the background is white, and the font weight to be bold. Then we will give some space by calling padding, let's say of 2 dp, and then we'll add another text, this time for content. Same thing as color is black. Font weight this time is light, or we can keep it as extra light if you want, just to check it once. And after this, what we can do here is that we can cap the number of lines for content to 2 because the content can be long. So what we can do is we can just cap it to 2, and in case there is more than 2 lines we are going to just show the ellipsis, right? Now before actually running the application and checking if everything is working fine, one last thing that we can do here is we can add a title to the window that appears. So this window composable is basically the window inside which our application opens up. So we can add a title to this. Let's call it as your news. You can add a lot of other things. There are a lot of other parameters. You can also add icons and things like that. You can play with those parameters, but for now I'm just adding the title, and let's run the application and check if everything is working fine. So this is the window that opened up, and you can see the title of the window is your news. We got the loading state, we got the top headlines. Let's see, yeah, we can see it is adaptive also. We're getting the number of columns adaptive, and if we search for a particular topic, let's say cricket, it should load the news related to that particular topic, and if we click on a certain news article, it should open up that particular news article on the browser. So that's pretty much it for this particular video. I hope you got to learn something new today. If you have stayed till the end, do like the video and subscribe the channel, and I will see you in the next one.